Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Well, hanging in there.
That's good. We're all watching the coup d'etat take place in front of us. Sorry.
It's good to have a sense of humor about it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I know that we're going to be expecting a few more people to be joining, from the task force as well as the community, but we've got a ton to cover. And, I've got a lot of administrative stuff I need to do at the beginning, so we might as well just kind of jump in. So good evening and welcome to the 7th meeting of the San Francisco Street Level Drug Dealing Task Force. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bo Kilmer. I'll be facilitating part of tonight's session. At about halfway through, I'll be passing it off to my colleague, Sarah Hunter. Due to the COVID-19 health emergency, task force members will attend the meeting through video conference and participate in the meeting to the same extent as if they were physically present. Before we jump into the agenda, I'd like to take care of a few administrative details. For members of the task force, if you would like to speak, simply click the raise hand button that's at the bottom right part of the participants box. And I'm going to do my best to call on you in the order you click. But I kindly ask that after you speak, if you can lower your hand, that would be great, because I know that sometimes I've missed a few of you because I thought that you just had forgotten to unclick. For members of the public, public comment will be available at the end of this agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 90 seconds to speak. Opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via phone by calling 415-655-0001. Again, 415-655-0001. The access code is 146-224-6423. Again, that's 146-224-6423. Then you're going to hit pound, and then you're going to hit pound again. When it's time for public comment, dial *3 to be added to the speaker line. Best practices are to call from a quiet location, speak clearly and slowly, turn down your television and radio and anything else you may have on. Alternatively, you may submit public comment by emailing me. It's kilmer@rand.org. That's KILMER@rand.org. If you submit public comment via email, it will be forwarded to the task force and it will be included as part of the official file. I just want to let the rest of the task force know that, and the public, that our next meeting will be December 1st. We're meeting the first Tuesday of each month. This was a little different because we had the election, but we'll be on track starting in December. As I said, we've got a lot to cover today. We're actually going to start with our guest speaker, Alyssa Striker, because she's actually on the East Coast right now, so it's a little late for her. So we're going to start with her. She's going to speak for 10, 12, 15 minutes. Then we'll have maybe 12 to 15 minutes of Q&A about her presentation. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Hunter, and we're going to spend some time talking about how we want to go about making decisions and making recommendations as a group. Within our work groups in the larger task force, I think we're getting to the point to where we've been brainstorming a lot of ideas. Really important for us, task force, to make a decision about what our process is going to be. So Sarah's got a lot of experience with this, so she'll be leading that. Then we're going to do the work group reports, and then right around 6:15, 6:20, we're going to move to public comment. So with that, I'm going to now invite Alyssa Striker to speak. Alyssa, you want to mute yourself. I'll be controlling your slides. As I said, Alyssa is, she's working on the East Coast right now, but she was doing some work with the Drug Policy Alliance, and she's the author of that report that I sent last week, Rethinking the Drug Dealer. So with that, Alyssa, I'll turn it over to you. And I'll start
Thanks so
sharing
much,
your
Bo.
presentation. Yep.
Yeah, well, Bo's pulling that up. I mean, that was a pretty sufficient introduction, but just to say a few more words about myself. I've worked in drug policy for the past 5 years, and over this time I've worked on a variety of issues, including drug criminalization, harm reduction. In addition to that, I have about 7 years of direct service experience, including working as an outreach worker with drug-involved people, connecting them to healthcare and other services. But next slide actually would be great, Bo. Thank you. But probably most relevant to today's meeting, as Bo said, I'm the author of the Drug Policy Alliance's 2019 report, Rethinking the Drug Dealer. And in the course of writing this report, I did a great deal of research on drug markets and people who work in them, various responses that communities have taken to them over the years, and sort of what the effects of those interventions were. And I've put together some thoughts that I hope you'll find helpful in thinking through some of the challenges that you're grappling with thinking about drug markets in District 6. This is, of course, an incredibly complicated issue, and as Bo said, I've been asked to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, so I will necessarily be focusing on only a few key points, but I do encourage you to check out the full report sort of for a more comprehensive look at this issue. Just trying to grab out some highlights, but there's a lot more in there that you may find useful and interesting. Next slide, please. So as Bo said, I'm on the East Coast. I'm not from San Francisco, but in preparation for speaking with you all today, I read through your past minutes. I listened to some of the Board of Supervisor hearing that created the task force. So I've been trying to bring myself up to speed and sort of some of the issues that you're grappling with and trying to mitigate in District 6. So, this is not a comprehensive list, but I know that there's a variety of issues related to overt drug selling activity, things like people feeling unsafe, parents feeling uncomfortable letting their kids walk to school, crowded sidewalks, difficult to navigate due to drug activity, impact on local businesses, and even sometimes harassment and assault. Next slide, please. So, historically, the way that, communities throughout the United States have tried to solve harms like these is through generally criminal justice system action, often by arresting people who are selling or trying to get them off the street in other ways, through diversion programs or similar. But actually, over the whole history of drug enforcement, there's actually not a lot of evidence to suggest that these tools work in most cases to address the type of problems that you're dealing with. So there's actually even some research that suggests that law enforcement interventions aimed solely at getting sellers off the street can even exacerbate a lot of the harms that you're dealing with, both from a community safety perspective and also harms for people who use drugs. Next slide, please. So, although it's a little bit counterintuitive, these approaches can actually make drug markets more violent and harmful to the surrounding communities. And this is backed up in a lot of the evidence base. So in 2011, a systematic review was published. So this is an academic article that looks at a series of other academic articles and sort of comes to conclusions based on the findings of multiple articles. It examined the effect of drug law enforcement on drug market violence, and reported that 91% of examined studies actually found that an increase in drug law enforcement intensity was associated with an increase in drug market violence. Next slide, please. So like I said, in some ways this is a bit of a counterintuitive finding. So thinking about what might be driving it, researchers have suggested that a number of dynamics might be at play. So, when some sellers are removed from the market, those that remain may compete to take over their market share, which may increase instability and conflict in some situations. Another factor that might be at play is that in some markets, strong interpersonal relationships between sellers can help facilitate peaceful management of competition and dispute resolution. So then, when a particular seller who's known to the other sellers in the market is removed, and replaced with a new seller who's, more unknown and doesn't have those working relationships, sometimes that can lead to more volatility. Or in some cases, increased risk of arrest may lead more risk-averse sellers to leave the market, which then creates opportunities for sellers who might be more comfortable with risk and potentially more confrontational or competitive to sort of move in and take over that market share. And that can, again, cause additional instability that potentially creates additional problems for the community. Next slide, please. And then in addition to these harms that can impact the community surrounding a drug market, removing people who sell drugs from the market may also cause unintended harm to people who use drugs by making an already unpredictable drug supply even less predictable for users. And this is because buying drugs from a consistent seller is an important strategy that many people who use drugs employ to keep themselves safe in what I think we all know is a really unpredictable drug market with an unpredictable supply. So then when one of these known sellers is removed from the market, people who use drugs may be forced to use a supply from someone else, someone they don't know as well. And this supply will then have an increasingly unknown composition and potency, which can put them at increasing risk of overdose. And in fact, research in this area is only just emerging, but in some jurisdictions, first responders have observed that localized spikes in overdoses occur immediately following law enforcement sweeps of local drug markets. So that's, I think, a really important dynamic to keep in mind as well. And overall, I bring up these potential unintended consequences so that you can keep them in mind when you're thinking about your recommendations and just sort of be cautious with some of these strategies and potentially think about ways that you can avoid causing some of these harms that often come through sort of the typical law enforcement driven approaches that many communities have taken to drug markets historically. Next slide, please. So on top of these potential unintended consequences of removing people from the drug market, there's also evidence to suggest that in most cases, removing individual drug sellers from the street does not tend to result actually in a sustained reduction in the size of the market as long as the demand for drugs remains the same. And in many cases, especially in markets where street-level sellers are linked to larger drug selling organizations, which I'm going to return to in a second, these sellers will be replaced fairly efficiently. So while it's definitely important to think through how to work with individual drug sellers and offer them opportunities to leave the market, I think it's also important to recognize that this so-called replacement effect, where a seller removed from the market is replaced by another seller, can be actually very hard to avoid. Next slide, please. So on the subject of large drug selling organizations, I think it's also worth noting that in most of these organizations, the people working on the street are at the very bottom of the hierarchy. They're probably not making much money. Anyone who's powerful enough in a drug selling organization to be getting rich off drug sales is not going to be working on a street corner where they're vulnerable to arrest. And this is part of why these people are so easily replaced. They're not making management decisions. Probably the drug supply network can continue without them. So I think that that's important to keep in mind when thinking about who it is that you're seeing on the street and their likely role within any broader networks, and sort of what the impact on that network or lack of impact will be from them being removed from the street. So, overall, I think it's safe to say that eliminating drug markets has shown itself to be very, very hard. There are a very few examples of situations where it has been accomplished successfully, despite decades of attempts. But the fact that eliminating drug markets is so challenging definitely doesn't mean that there's no way to reduce the harms that are being caused by this drug market and address some of the really serious issues that your community is struggling with. Next slide, please. So to do this, I just want to briefly return to the list of harms that I referenced at the beginning. You know, people feeling unsafe, kids not able to walk to school, crowded sidewalks, challenges for local business, harassment. And I think one possible way forward for your community, or sort of one thing that I think it might be useful for you to think about, is how you can focus on intervening in this drug market to address those specific problems and develop frameworks for intervention that aim to eliminate these harms rather than eliminating the market altogether, which, like I said, is something that we've seen, you know, really limited success with over the whole history of drug enforcement. And I think, you know, one thing that often gets forgotten when we talk about drug markets is that a lot of drug markets, even most drug markets in, you know, the United States, don't cause harms like the ones that you're experiencing. The vast majority of American drug markets are fairly peaceful, actually, and inconspicuous, to the point where most of us never notice them. And it's important to note that there's a lot of selection bias, I think, in our perception of drug markets, because we tend to notice the harmful ones while not considering the less harmful ones, because the less harmful ones are less likely to attract our attention because, you know, they're not causing any harms, they're not disrupting communities. And I think that, you know, once we start to look carefully at some of this diversity that exists among drug markets, and to see that a lot of the harms that we're talking about are not actually inherent to all drug markets, there's this whole new line of questioning that opens up in terms of, you know, how can we start thinking about interventions that aim not necessarily to eliminate these markets, because, as I said earlier, an elimination approach, you know, is pretty unlikely to succeed. But rather to address the harms that the markets are causing and design interventions that aim to guide these markets to take less harmful forms. Next slide, please. So what does this actually look like? I mean, I think it means, instead of focusing solely on this question, how can we eliminate this drug market, it means that we start asking questions that might get us thinking about different types of policy interventions. So I sort of brainstormed a list of some of these questions. There are certainly others, but some questions that came to mind for me are things like, you know, is there an area where drug selling activity could be encouraged to move to that would cause fewer problems? Or could sellers be incentivized to change their behavior, you know, for example, not to block foot traffic or sell near businesses? Would it make a difference if sellers knew that they would be sort of more left alone if they weren't causing these harms? You know, many drug markets have shifted to more of a delivery model as cell phones have become more ubiquitous, and these markets tend to be more discreet. So, you know, that's just one example, but asking questions like, are there more discreet ways that drug selling could happen in this area that would be less disruptive and harmful? Are there ways that relationships could be cultivated with sellers or groups of sellers who work in less disruptive ways? And could, you know, these relationships encourage these sellers to discourage harmful behavior in the market that they're part of? Or, you know, obviously really important is the question of violence, and thinking about, when violence does occur in this market, what specifically is driving that violence? You know, is it competition? Is it, you know, conflict over drug transactions? And are there interventions that could help address these problems specifically and help cultivate stable working relationships that could reduce the sort of violent interactions? And finally, you know, could the sellers in the community be engaged in harm reduction initiatives, such as distributing naloxone or sterile supplies, or participating in drug checking initiatives, which are, you know, interventions that there are some harm reduction organizations that have been exploring, using people who sell drugs as part of secondary exchange initiatives to distribute clean syringes and the like. So like I said, those are just a few examples, but I think, you know, if you're not having conversations like these, you're missing a really powerful opportunity to improve safety in your community. And I'd really encourage you to think outside the box and remember that aiming to remove individual sellers from the market has historically had limited success in reducing drug market harm. So exploring some of these other tools and other possible interventions with slightly different goals might be a way to sort of maximize your chances of success. And I think that, you know, by focusing on these specific harms and thinking about ways to intervene in the market to mitigate or eliminate these harms, you might be able to make some real progress in terms of making your community safer. So next slide, but that's all from me. But I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. Let me stop sharing and get back to seeing who's got their hands raised. So if there's anyone, so I see Judy Martin. Let me. Judy, did you have a question? If so, we should just unmute. Yeah, I want to find her. I see that. All right, I see Max has his hand. I've lost Judy here for a second, so I will go to Max, and then I'm going to try to find Judy. So Max, let me unmute you. There you go.
Hi, sorry, I can't get my video to work, so you got me voice only. Alyssa, thanks for the presentation. So, you know, I where you're coming from, and I read all of the PDF report that you sent us, top to bottom. And so I kind of have a pretty good sense of where you guys position yourselves on this. But I think in the situation that we have in the Tenderloin, where we've got, you know, gang-related drug dealing, you know, what am I going to do when I've got a dealer who's a repeat offender, who's an illegal immigrant, and basically has a stay-away order that he's been violating multiple times? I mean, are we going to arrest this guy? Are you saying we don't arrest this guy? We say, I mean, because this is a lot of what we're dealing with down there.
No, thanks for the question. I mean, I think what I'm saying actually is neither of those things. And it's more saying regardless of what you do with that guy, the market is probably not going to change much. So I think that there's a separate and really important conversation about sort of responses to individual behavior and what accountability looks like. But I think that it's important to sort of not get that confused with this other conversation about how do we change this market and how do we make the operation of the whole market different and reduce the harms that it's causing in the community. Because I think ultimately, you know, whatever decisions are made with the individual that you're talking about, you know, if they're removed from the market, they'll probably be replaced. So I think that those are sort of separate, important conversations. And I just think it's really important to recognize the fact that, you know, they're not sort of, they're not the same. And perhaps the goals that should guide thinking on each of those strands of the conversation are different. You know, in one case, you're looking to have some sort of like market level effects on the operation of the whole drug market. And on the other hand, you're thinking about accountability for this individual person. And those are quite separate things, I think.
But how, you see, I don't see that. And, you know, because what I see is a lack of accountability with the drug sellers that are going on. And I've watched this market. I lost my business to these guys because these guys took over my corner. And so I've watched these men operate and some women operate and watch this operations go. And there doesn't seem to be accountability in San Francisco. So what I'm trying to figure out is, I appreciate where you're coming on reducing some of the sentencing stuff. And like I said, I think you guys, your work, what you're doing is important, but I'm still trying to figure out, like, how are we supposed to deal with this guy? If we're not going to put him in jail, what do we do? Because there aren't alternatives for them. Right. And so, and unfortunately, this is not just one guy. This is the majority of the volume sales that we're seeing on the street in the Tenderloin.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Max. I saw, so Judy, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, and then
you somehow made my video appear as well.
Well, hey, I'm magic. I don't know. So anyways, Judy, before you speak, though, it's going to go Judy, Rachel, Curtis, and then I see Tom. So, okay, you're up, Judy.
Thank you. Alyssa, I really liked your presentation. I found it provocative to hear about non-harmful drug markets or less harmful drug markets. And I wanted to find out, like, what's the least, like, you probably are thinking of some models that I haven't seen. And you mentioned even harm reduction be included at wherever the market is. Have you also seen markets that are offered indoors instead of being on the street and taking over corners that work better? Or have you seen drug markets that include supervised consumption? What have you seen that's less harmful that we might aim for example?
No, that's a great question. I'll give some examples of markets that look very different, but there's just huge diversity among drug markets. So, in the research that I did for the report, I read, ethnographic studies on drug markets that take place on college campuses. I read studies about drug markets that take place predominantly in suburban areas where, arrangements to meet are made by cell phone, and people meet up in a park or a restaurant or a parking lot, and then, leave when the transaction is completed. There are also, so I work, I volunteer for a harm reduction provider in Washington, D.C., where I live, and we give sterile syringes in large numbers to people who we know are involved in drug selling, and they redistribute them to their clients. There's been some qualitative research about, talking to people who sell drugs and assessing their interest in participating in drug checking initiatives. So saying, if you had the opportunity, would you bring in your supply so we can see what's inside it? And then you can share that information with your clients. And, a lot of the drug sellers in these qualitative studies say, I would love to do that. I'm nervous about being arrested, and there's definitely some trust building happening. But there, the research that's been done suggests that, most sellers, many sellers at least, want to, provide a product that's predictable and that meets their clients' needs. So, those are just a few examples. There used to be, I used to live in Vancouver in British Columbia, and there was a woman who sold drugs and flowers outside the grocery store where I went, and that it never caused any problems. Obviously, the flowers were a little more overt than the fact that she was selling drugs, but it really runs the gamut, and there's a whole ton of factors that sort of influence, what these markets look like. You can imagine, obviously, for a delivery-based market, everybody needs to have access to a cell phone, for example. But really, it really spans a really wide spectrum of markets. I don't know if that answered your question, but there really is just a huge diversity of drug markets and the various forms that they take.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rachel?
Hi, thank you so much. I also read the report cover to cover, so thank you so much for that and for the presentation. I'm wondering, in thinking about alternative strategies, particularly towards targeting kind of the supply, I'm wondering about confiscation as a strategy instead of arrest, whether you've looked at how effective that is and whether there are harms associated with confiscation or benefits associated with it. And then I'm also wondering about strategies for targeting the top, because as you mentioned, the sellers on the street are not making a lot of money. They don't have very much power. And what are some strategies that might work towards affecting the folks that are less visible on the streets than the people on the streets?
Yeah, both are great questions. I can definitely speak to the first one. I'm a little less knowledgeable about the second. I think some of the dangers of confiscation come, when you consider the fact that in a lot of these cases, the person who's selling on the street has paid, will owe somebody money for the drugs that they sell. And then obviously that can cause volatility down the line if they're not able to pay them back. And sort of where that volatility occurs, it really just sort of depends. But I think that's the big thing that I would say to keep in mind. And also, sort of the impact again on people who use drugs and, if a supply that's of reasonably predictable potency is confiscated, and then this individual still owes someone money, they need to make it up in a hurry. What are they going to be mixing? What are they going to be stretching, and like what is going to end up in the market, and is that going to impact users in a negative way? So I think those are sort of the two caveats that I would think of for that. I actually, it's a great question in terms of strategies for targeting the top. I'm not an expert on sort of the investigatory side of policing, but I think it's absolutely a great question to pursue, but not one, unfortunately, that I know much about.
Great. Okay. Curtis, you're up. Yeah.
Hi, Alyssa. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really great, and actually you jogged my mind with some new questions that I'm looking forward to. But can you explain to me, like, Max raised a question about this one guy, what and removing him from the street. Can you really explain a little more about what this replacement effect actually translate into, like on the street when we do pull people out? Like what impact is that really going to have, or does it have?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm speaking, of course, in generalities, but over the decades that we've been trying to remove people from the street, we have seen that in most cases, those people are pretty quickly replaced by someone else. So, there might be a short-term decline in the number of people who are selling on the street, but in most cases, somebody's going to be out there on the same corner, as long as there are still people who are looking to buy in that area. I've seen quotes from law enforcement who say that it feels like picking these people up is like playing whack-a-mole, because that's how quickly somebody else comes back. And, as I alluded to, talking about the structure of drug organizations, and I do think it's important to note that not all drug markets are associated with large drug supply networks, but in those that are, it's very much a business model. So if there is market share to be had, and if somebody is no longer selling to a particular group of buyers, the organization is going to send somebody new. And, just thinking again about how replaceable from a skills perspective a lot of these people are, because they are so far down the hierarchy, they're not really integral to the operating of the network. So removing one person is really unlikely to impact the broader operation of the network. And then, the people who are calling the shots are not likely to just sort of walk away from that area, again, as long as the demand is there.
Great. Okay, we've got a ton to cover tonight, and I see that, so next up we've got Tom, then the captain, then Hadi, and I think we're going to end it there. So, Captain, Tom, let me unmute you here, unless you could do it yourself. There you go.
Hi, Alyssa. Thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate it. I have a question about when you talk about when you remove dealers from the street and the potential danger for interrupting the supply. Has the advent of fentanyl being on the streets made you stop and maybe reconsider the dangers around that, or the issue around the unsafe supply, since it seems to have permeated pretty much all the street level drugs out there on the street right now, where from what I've experienced, it's being formerly homeless and a drug addict on the street, and then now being on the tenderloin. I see pretty much all the drugs now. There's a really good chance from any dealer they're going to be tainted with fentanyl, which just increases the chances of overdose. Have you stopped maybe think about that for a minute, and how that has pretty much contaminated the entire supply in a lot of people's eyes in regards to the street level drugs, at least in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, as you know, like drug markets are very local. So, there's a lot of variation in terms of what's available and sort of what the variation is among it. I think until there's safe supply of some kind that's available, there's always going to be this risk of unpredictability in terms of the composition of drugs that people purchase on the street. I think sort of when this idea of a trusted seller comes in is sort of mitigating the impacts of that. So, you know, if somebody, you know, buys from the same seller consistently, there's a higher probability that that's going to be more consistent in terms of composition and potency than sort of trying their luck with somebody else who they're not familiar with and whose supply they're not familiar with. And, you know, it's certainly an imperfect solution. It's not enough in terms of keeping people who use drugs safe, but it does sort of mitigate some of the you know, most egregious degree of unpredictability in the market when there's some consistency in who they're buying from. So I absolutely take your point. I think it's sort of a harm reduction tactic that many people report is a meaningful part of the decisions they make in terms of buying drugs and using.
Thanks. Okay, Captain Fabry?
Hi, Alyssa. I just want to just kind of put it out there to the group and ask you this question. I think our drug market here in the Tenderloin is unique because we're in such a small, concentrated area. And I don't know if you're familiar with the statistics, but over the past 2 years, we've identified about 1,000 active drug dealers in this very small district, 1,000. So, and most of them, pretty much all of them are still out of custody, despite all of these hundreds and hundreds of arrests that we've made. So in light of that, and in light of Tom's comments about fentanyl and the record number of deaths we're anticipating this year, how do you think that law enforcement would actually take a different approach that would be accepted by the community if we were not doing enforcement? And we were actually concerned with not disrupting the market and, you know, people getting a inconsistent supplier, because just having seen the drug users that walk down the street, they're not going to the same dealer. They're going to whoever's selling drugs on that corner at any given time, just given the sheer number of dealers that we have. And their product is pretty much all the same. So I just want to ask, you know, what do you propose that law enforcement do that would be accepted by the community short of doing enforcement?
I mean, I think it's a good question. And I think where I see a role for law enforcement is perhaps in some of these conversations about what does it look like to incentivize the market to operate differently, you know, and to say, perhaps, you know, in cases where there's harassment or assault or that kind of thing, certain behaviors that are causing the harm, I think like maybe there's a role for law enforcement in creating disincentives for people to behave in those ways. Because I think, you know, the issue a lot of the time is this sort of indiscriminate approach to people who are selling purely by virtue of the fact that they're selling. So maybe law enforcement then takes a bit of a, you know, a reorientation towards focusing on people who are selling in ways that are actively causing harm and thinking about ways to incentivize different types of behaviors.
Okay, I'm not sure what that would look like, because if you ask the community here, there's, I don't mean to give commentary, but I think I'm kind of speaking for the people that I'm hearing from in the community, is that they're all causing disruption and harassing people, and there's a lot of violence happening here in the neighborhood. So, but thank you for your answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I guess I would add, you know, I think in thinking about that, it's important to kind of keep in mind that, like, it's not like the things that we've always done are working, right? Like, it's not like that we can just do that thing that we've always done before that has shown so much success. So while I think it is hard to imagine a new way to approach these questions, I think there's, you know, a real danger that we don't often kind of give it the attention it deserves of falling back on the same old thing that, as I said, you know, could potentially actually be exacerbating these problems.
Okay. All right. And the final question goes to Hadi. Let me unmute you here. Yep. Great.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Alyssa, for your presentation. Sort of related to what Captain Fabry was asking, and do you think that is it the drug sales that you've seen that are themselves harmful to the community, or is it just the realities of poverty? Because the Tenderloin is a very poor area. There's a lot of homeless people, especially during COVID. It seems like there's a lot of people living in tents. There's a lot of people using drugs. There's a lot of people out there who are really struggling. And then also sort of related to that is, what are some successful strategies that you've seen that can help people exit the market of particularly sellers more so than users?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think when thinking about that, really the starting point has to be, people sell drugs to meet a need. And in order to figure out sort of how programs can be designed or services can be provided that give people an off-ramp from drug selling, really the starting point is, what need are they meeting? And like, is that need income? If it's income, what's the barrier to finding legal employment? Is it because it's the way that they access drugs? What's the barrier? How can we think about sort of harm reduction initiatives that would give them smoother access to the things they need through means other than selling? And I think, people sell drugs for all kinds of reasons. Of course, income is a very prominent one. So again, thinking about what the barriers are to people accessing legal employment, I think is really key. Of course, how much money you need to live is deeply dependent on the cost of housing, availability of supportive services. So I really think that it's important to kind of take a really tailored approach to the population of sellers that you're dealing with, and start from this question of what need is selling meaning for them.
All right. Well, Alyssa, thank you so much. I know it's really late there, and I didn't think we were going to keep you this long, but I appreciate you taking all the questions and for spending the time preparing the report as well as the presentation. And yeah, thank you. And I'm sure, thank you for sharing your email address, because I'm sure different members of the task force may be reaching out to you. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. And yeah, like Bo said, he has my email address, so please feel free to reach out. I would be happy to hear from you. And I am going to jump off and go to bed now, but I hope you have a wonderful rest of your meeting.
All right. Take care, Alyssa.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Okay. Next up, we're going to have Sarah Hunter start our discussion about, a process for making recommendations. So, Sarah, do you want to share slides? Or I can make you a presenter. So then you can just oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Okay.
Sarah, I just unmuted you.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you may want to open up the go full
slides.
Yeah.
How does that look?
Perfect.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, I just wanted to have a chance to discuss a couple ways that we can go about creating recommendations from this task force and get input from everyone on, sort of what your thoughts are on this process. Move my slides. This is just to remind you where we are. We're in phase 2, which is exploring policy options for the problems and needs that we've identified, and sort of the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of these different policy options. And that's one reason why we created these 3 separate work groups based on the problems and needs that we identified early on. And so we're getting ready to move into phase 3. which would be to decide on the recommendations that we want to put forth and write up the report that would clarify what these recommendations are and how they would prioritize them and what would be in place to make them happen. And phase 4 would be making sure policymakers are held accountable for considering recommendations and making positive changes in District 6. So tonight, we want to get your input on what the process should be for making those final recommendations. And I know each of the work groups are starting to come up with what, sort of bubble up from this process of what the recommendations may be. So we're not ready to do that yet, but I just wanted to plant the seed. Now that that's happening, we're moving in that direction about the process of making those recommendations. To remind you, the ordinance that created the task force does not specify how to do this. And there's obviously many options, and the process could go on forever if we don't, sort of contain it. So that's something we need to think about as well, like sort of how many phases we want to go through. So the goal tonight is to start discussing this. So a couple critical issues to think about is just how you will select the potential recommendations to vote on. And then 2, deciding how to vote on the recommendations and discuss the results in the final report. In terms of, there probably won't be full consensus, just reality, but we'll want to, think about what do we include in the report? Is it the majority of recommendations that gain support or not? And whether we create another important process question for us to think about is whether we create a multi-stage voting process. And I'll give you a couple examples of that next. So one good example is, and some of you are probably more familiar with this than I am because you might have taken part in the math task force, but we looked at that as one example. So in that, there was a qualitative analysis of using data from task force meetings, focus groups with community members, interviews, and an environmental scan of what other jurisdictions were doing to create provisional recommendations. And then the task force members, and that was done by the facilitator group. And then the task force members engaged in a prioritization process and rated each on a 5-point scale of its potential impact on reducing adverse health and social impacts. And then through that prioritization process, there was they started out with a list of 30, and through that first rating system, they winnowed it down to 17 recommendations based on their ratings. And then they categorized the subset of 17 based on a discussion of sort of the resource needs and structural barriers to their implementation to kind of come up with a list of what could happen first, second, third, and so on. So that's just one example of how to talk about this approach. Another example is from the Safe Injection Facilities Task Force, and how that was a much kind of a streamlined process in that they convene different ways of gaining information for different stakeholder groups, public meetings, surveys with people who inject drugs, demographic data on people in early recovery, information for business owners, neighborhood groups, and a resident survey to come up with recommendations. So, there's kind of a few ways we could go about this. And I think that at least with the work group that I've been working with, I think I've started to foreshadow this process of thinking about how much you want us to do, sort of the homework and heavy lifting on the first phase, or how much you want this to come through the focus, the work groups. So one approach we could use is having Rand and List generate an initial list of recommendations based on our review of the task force meeting notes, a literature review, the work group meeting notes as candidates that then the task force would discuss and rate, vote on. Or a different approach would be each of the 3 work groups would come up with their own list of recommendations, like say up to 10 recommendations that would then be put in front of the full task force to consider. So those are 2, very different approaches to coming up with a list of like candidate recommendations. And there might be other ways to go about it, but those are the 2 initial. So that's one thing I want to get your feedback on. Let me get through the other option that we need to consider and then open it up for discussion from you all. The other option we need to think about is how we rate and vote on these. So there could be a one-time single vote rating or voting event on these candidate recommendations, or we try to make room for 2 rounds of voting, in which case you might have a preliminary voting period where people rate the candidate recommendations, but also have a chance to write in any that are missing. And then in the second round, people would consider not only that first set of recommendations, but any write-ins. And in that second round, there also would be the opportunity to give back feedback on like what were the ratings in the first round. So an opportunity to build more consensus around what the recommendations would be. Now, when we're going to do that, we just want to make sure we leave enough time for you guys to do a 2-stage voting or rating round if that's what you want. And then again, we could do that indefinitely, winnowing it down each time, but we don't have a whole lot of time at this point. As Bo mentioned, we're on our 7th meeting already. But again, you guys might have suggestions of how you want to go about this. So I think that's the end of my slideshow. So I'll open it up now for questions and comments, and Bo and I can field those questions and comments.
Okay, I think we've got Teresa up first and then Judy. So Teresa, you're up.
Let me unmute myself here. I guess I just feel like maybe there's a step missing. Like, I feel like our work group's been working really well, having great discussions, but I have no idea, other than the very short reports that happen at these once-a-month meetings, what the other work groups are doing. And I feel like it's really important that we somehow do some integration and have some more meaningful discussion than can probably happen at the occasional the occasional task force meeting. So I don't know exactly how that could be done, but I would like, for example, to at least see a draft of what the other work groups are talking about so that we can really consider how our recommendations fit with those, come up with maybe some changes, somehow another step in there that could involve a couple of work groups working together, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there definitely is time to work that in and having like more extended conversation about these provisional recommendations among all of you before you get to a rating voting stage.
Yep. All right. Judy, you're up next, and then Curtis. So I'll mute you.
So, Sarah, thanks for laying it all out. I notice there's not a fan above your head this time.
I have a fake background. I still have a fan, but yes, it is. It's cooler now. It is 40 degrees here now. So
I agree with Teresa that discussing options is a good thing for us to do as a group. And I think one of the ways to do that would be for the facilitators to gather what they know from each of the subgroups and make a list of things that stand out. And then when we're discussing it, our subgroup feels like something important was missed or should be added or is missing from the, we can say so. I also think that the two-step is better because you kind of weed out a bunch of stuff and then you decide if you miss something too much, you realize, oh, it's glommed onto this one. We can combine things because you don't want to make 50 recommendations. You know?
Yeah.
Good point.
Great. Okay, Curtis?
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you for that presentation. So a couple things. I do think that there needs to be some way that we can share what we're working on a little bit across the committees so that we can at least, because it might affect our recommendation, like hearing what theirs is, there may be a way ours would fit together better if we change something on our end. So at least being able to see where the other groups are at as we're going through the process would probably be helpful, like maybe a joint Google Doc or something. I don't know how we could accomplish that, but something. And I really like this idea. I actually feel more comfortable with recommendations coming from each subcommittee, like each creating their own recommendations and bringing them to the bigger group, and we can whittle it down from there rather than just sending it to Rand and letting them siphon it themselves and then give it back to us. I think it needs to come from us. And it's the first round, right? We can worry about language finessing later, but and I do like the idea of a 2-cycle, like where once we each bring forward what our 10 recommendations or less or whatever, we could do a round of rating each of those from all, the whole list, and then to whittle it down some, and then we can do votes to see what we end up with in the final round. But I think the most important piece is I would like to see what the other groups are doing so we can see how they relate to each other, and I really want it to come from the group up, not top down.
Thank you, Curtis. No, that's great. And yeah, this whole task force was set up to be community driven. This wasn't they weren't trying to have someone external come out, make some recommendations and leave. And so I appreciate that. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the ideas you shared. I also wondered if maybe the folks at Random List could help us as a recommendation sort of structure, so that as we are kind of looking at all the work recommendations, we can make sure that the level of detail and information can at least have a standardization before we start sharing it, because I could see that it would probably be more efficient in the long run rather than having different levels of recommendations and then trying to communicate on that. I think that might be helpful as well for us. Yeah.
No, Ken, I think that's a great idea. And so, we can, one basis would be like, looking at what they did on the math report in terms of, but I think maybe what we could do is we could come up with a few different ideas and then kind of float that out there. And so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. All right. All right, I see. Judy and Curtis, you still have your hand. Oh, you took yours down. Judy and Curtis, I don't think you have anything else to you lowered yours. Does anybody else have anything they want to share? This is going to be an ongoing conversation. The plan wasn't to make a final decision tonight. It's just that as we're having these conversations about the recommendations, it's going to be useful for us to make sure we all agree on kind of the process. Right, because I think there'll be some things that everyone will agree on. I think there'll be others where there'll be some dissent, and so we have to decide as a group how we want to deal with that dissent. But I agree that we need to be doing. We're now at the point to where each of these different work groups has, they've done more than just brainstorm. They've got a list of some different ideas. Not that everything's been kind of hammered out. So maybe we can make that the focus of our meeting on December 1st. We really need to do that. And but still, Curtis, I think you're right. We might be able to. There's nothing stopping us from doing some type of Google Doc or whatever. For making it easier to share. Because I do think there's going to be some overlap, and I think that's going to be important. Okay.
So Bo, I was just going to suggest that maybe at our next meeting, I don't think you've lined up any guest speakers yet. If not, not have one and really dig in a little more with each of the work groups, having like 10 or 15 minutes to kind of present where they're at, where their recommendations are headed, and so we can have an open discussion. People can kind of have a sense of where all the work groups are. And I don't know about the other, I know my work group will have another meeting between now and then, and that will help us, have a focus for that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And also the work groups are in different places. And so I was going to get to it. I mean, at least within kind of work group one, we're still in the process of, we're analyzing data, but we're also getting more data as well. We've realized some areas where there's some disagreement. And so we're in the process of doing that. And so, it's going to, there's some recommendations are going to take some more time because we want to make sure that they're based on fact and not anecdote. And so, but I do think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that makes it, so having no guest speaker next week, or I'm sorry, for the next meeting, I think makes a lot of sense. All right. So with that, is there anything else, Sarah, or anyone else on the group that you want to raise about this? We may send out an additional email about this, because it is one thing that, for the work groups to know what the other work groups are doing, but at the same time also making a decision about, are we going to do this two-step process? We'll have to get some general consensus on that because sooner rather than later. So we may send out an email about that.
Sorry, this is Sasha. Just a quick kind of process question. Bo and Sarah, maybe we can also touch base in between now and the next meeting to kind of talk about maybe what a structure of recommendations could look like to Ken's point, and kind of discuss maybe how we can start to bake that into conversations within our individual work groups, so that when we come, together a month from now, it's potentially possible that we have at least been thinking about that sort of structure, even if we haven't concretized that exactly.
I think that's excellent. So I think that's the other thing too, in terms of, well, how do we, when we talk about these potential recommendations, obviously we're not going to be able to do a formal cost analysis of every single one, but we may be able to come up with some ranking of, do we think this is, relatively expensive, relatively cheap, so you can think about this in terms of the dimensions, in terms of the cost, also the time frame, right? I think a lot of the things that we're going to be recommending, are going to take a while to implement, and then, you may not see results for a couple of years. It doesn't mean they should be considered, but at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're discussing discussing recommendations that can make an immediate impact on improving the lives of the people that live in District 6. So that's why this was created. So I think we are going to have to kind of balance that as well. Right, and I see that, I'm sorry?
Agreeing with you.
Okay. Max, I see that your hand's up.
Yeah, I guess I do have one question on the group that's working on the harms related to. Is there a working list of that we'll all get access to or see? Because that could be something that would be pretty simple for at least everyone to kind of get their input on remotely and individually, in case there's anything missed, or people feel like we've got it covered, or whatever that might be.
Yeah, Sasha, I don't know if we've got, so Sasha's kind of helping with the work group 3. I don't know if we've got, I know that, early on, in one of our, one of the PowerPoints, we had a list of kind of different categories of harms. I don't know if we've done anything since then to kind of build that out.
Well, I kind of feel that's a huge part of this, because if we don't take a look at what the harms are and agree on what the problem is, it's going to be really hard to come up with any realistic recommendations on what we're solving here. Because this is such a big thing, and we all get stuck in our ruts a little bit, including me. But as I'm stepping back on it, I'm looking at the layer of harms, and I'm watching CVS and Walgreens go out of business, and a harm is that a little old lady can't get her prescription because she loses her pharmacy because People who are using drugs are stealing from the pharmacy to feed their habit. And so there's a lot of different layers on this, and I just want to make sure that we have all that. Yeah, it's so big, we have to boil it down and figure out what we can deal with, I guess.
Yes, I can speak for work group 3. I think that we can, at least for the work group 3, and I'm sorry, I'm outside, so if you hear outside noise, I think we can agree on I think the hard part is agreeing on harms depending on the end goal, right? The way that we've split up the work groups at this point in time, the harms might be different for each work group. And so I think then we have to also agree what are the consistent themes or consistency across each of those work groups when we define the harms. I think, at least from work group 3's perspective, we've had conversations with different individuals within the community to gauge and get a perspective on what they deem the harms are. So it's not necessarily defined by us alone, but defined by different organizations that are doing work in the field and in District 6, and individuals that are doing work in District 6 and leaning on work that's already been done to collect that information. So I think that's something that we can definitely share out, and maybe again, I don't know if the best practice is to go through each work group and kind of determine the harms and then identify what's the consistent theme across those different work groups for the larger task force. Because to the example that you mentioned, that's like a microcosm of a larger issue. And so again, even determining the level of harm, is it the individual's harm? Is it the community's harm? It could really get complicated.
Yeah. The one thing I will add is that, one of the reasons we settled on these 3 groups was based on the harms that we had talked about early on. But that said, I do think that within those lists, we may be able to kind of flesh those out. So
great.
All right, so I think we've got Curtis, and then Judy, and then Teresa. So yeah, Curtis, let me.
Well, actually, Sasha summed it up fairly well for us. I was just wanting to bring forward that we have in our group, we have been talking about the harms, and we've been talking a great deal about what are the actual harms to the community, and we're looking at it through our lens, which is group 3. We were assigned to look at it through a community perspective, right? What are the harms as a community? What are the community responses to that? So to Max's point about the little old lady getting a prescription at Walgreens because the drug dealers or drug users coming in and stealing stuff, that's not what this task force is going to be able to solve, right? We're not going to be able to solve homelessness, and we're not going to be able to eliminate drug users and drug using and people doing the things that they do to try to support their habit. This was designed to talk about drug dealing and the harms related to drug dealing. I want to make sure we keep our focus at least.
Yep. Great. Thank you. Great. Judy?
So I like the idea of hearing from all the groups, and I also like the idea of the facilitators helping us, as you mentioned, Bo, look at what's evidence-based, what evidence there is for it, and what the community tenderloin. Several people have pointed out how special the tenderloin is, how unusual. And so anything we can get from the community to decide whether it applies or not to the tenderloin. And it would be nice to have that. It's part of what we look at.
Yep.
I don't know if that's realistic or not, but
yeah.
I assume you guys are keeping track, you guys being the facilitators, are keeping track of the things that each group comes up with, right?
Yeah, no, we are, and then so that's why a couple weeks ago I started sending around a couple of those extra systematic reviews of things that I had heard, things that had come up in some of the groups, and so I think that's going to be that's a big part of our job here is making sure that if we get to a point where you start really seriously considering a potential recommendation, it's we can be the ones to help you figure out, well, is there a research base on this? And then even though if there are a few studies, what's good, what's not. So in terms of data collection, so no, so I expect to continue to be doing that. But now that we're getting closer in terms of making potential recommendations, we may be able to do that a bit more systematically.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So we've got Teresa.
Yes, I was just going to say a little bit to echo what Curtis said. Our group has been focusing on some of the harms, and also that the Tenderloin Council group, community group, met again actually last night, and there was a pretty long list of harms that was generated by that group back in October. And we can certainly share that. And I think our work group is going to meet tomorrow. So perhaps we can come up with some kind of list that we could share with the whole group even after tomorrow. And I have to, in some ways, I actually have to disagree with Curtis. I know we can't solve every problem of the Tenderloin, but I do think that if one of the biggest problems is that the little old lady can't get her medication, and if getting rid of drug dealers won't solve that problem, then I feel like then we're missing kind of the whole point of why this whole task force was created. Because so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we should be looking at all the harms that are caused by drug dealing and drug use in the community of the Tenderloin.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Teresa. All right. I think Max, did you have your hand up from earlier, or is this a new hand?
I put mine up again.
Okay.
I'll drop it. That was from earlier.
Okay. All right, Judy, it's all you, and then we'll open it up for public comment.
I think it's really interesting that the issue about pharmacies not having enough pharmacy availability in certain neighborhoods came up. And it's true in the Bayview as well as the Tenderloin. And the reason I know this is because in my work with demand reduction, we look at treatment for opiate use disorder, and that's almost always a medication. And so we're trying to prevent overdose by making buprenorphine very accessible. And one of the problems we're running into is after hours, all of the people that go to harm reduction sites, we offer them buprenorphine. The only place they can get it is a behavioral health pharmacy because they've been 86 from everywhere else. They can't go in there. In other words, not only are the residents being hurt, but also the people who could use treatment are not accessing treatment because of that. So some like talking about what we could do about that, I think is very appropriate. Like maybe, I don't know, recommending delivery, something like that, delivery systems or expanding hours of behavioral health pharmacy, or,
An outpatient pharmacy type thing, or mobile pharmacy.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else on the task force have anything else they want to share or say before we open it up to public comment? All right. So scroll down here. All right. Okay, I see members of the community are putting their hands up. So, okay, I'm going to do this. So once again, public comment is available. The phone number is 415-655-0001. The access code is 146-224-6423. Once again, that's the call-in number is 415-655-0001. Access code 146-224-6423. And then you're going to hit star and then star again. And then when it's time for public comment, you're going to dial, which is now, you're going to dial *3 to get in the speaker line. So, okay, I'm just going to go down here in terms of who I see first. All right, and I will unmute you. And
this is David Elliott Lewis. Can you hear me?
Yes, yep, perfect. You've got 90 seconds.
I'm not calling in. I'm on the WebEx. Okay. But thank you. So, I'm sorry, how many seconds do I have?
90.
Okay, thank you. You know, I go back and forth. I wrestle with the issue of enforcement or alternative approaches to solving this problem. But truth be told, unless we're going to set up like a safe selling zone or containment zone to sell, which is kind of what some people think at a Tenderloin already, I think we're going to need some degree of enforcement just to maintain safety. I'm a recent subscriber to the Citizen app where I can see the level of crime and violence we have in the Tenderloin. And there's a scary amount of violence with stabbings and fights and weapons involved and gunfire. And so I don't see us achieving safety without some degree of enforcement. And I think your task force needs to acknowledge the role of enforcement as part of the solution. And this, even though if it's done excessively, it can be very disruptive and destructive, but zero enforcement is not the answer either. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of an expanded safe passage program where you could expand what we currently have, the Tenderloin Community Benefit District Safe Passage, to help people get through the drug areas, older, vulnerable people get through without feeling endangered. Thank you. This is David Elliott Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David Elliott. All right. All right, speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Know the name?
Yeah.
Is that
Eric, we can hear you. Can you restart?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of great stuff here, and thank you to everyone volunteering for this and for what's being said. I think it's a really complex situation, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. However, I do want to remind people that the Tenderloin is a state of emergency here when it comes to the open air drug dealing on the street, and the assaults, the intimidation, the violence, the harassment, and that these things need to be dealt with urgently. And as much as I like hearing about what's being said here, I don't feel like there's a real urgency being driven here where there's like, there's a fire that needs to be put out now. We could talk about safety procedures and safety protocol and best practices, but let's put out the fire, please, before we start talking about what insurance is needed, what emergency ladders need to be installed, the new fire alarm that needs to go in. Can we skip all that and go to the immediate factor that something needs to be done with the amount of violence on the street right now and the harm that's being done to the tenants and the people in the community that live here? It's traumatic. Let's stay in my place for a while if you don't get it. And I'm an adult male. There's a lot of seniors and fragile people here in the community that are suffering dramatically because of it. I'm sorry. I just feel like there needs to be an urgency to this soon, please. As a long-term resident community organizer, I just feel it's really important that that needs to be addressed more seriously. But thank you for all your effort and work, but please, let's step it up.
All right. Thank you, Eric. All right. Speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Lee, and I work with incarcerated immigrants at Asian Law Caucus here in San Francisco. And I wanted to bring up what Alyssa Striker brought up during the presentation about really looking into kind of what the needs of the dealers are to keep them selling, because obviously it doesn't, this is not something that sounds like it pays well. It's dangerous for them too. I know that from my colleagues who work directly with Honduran youth, we know that many of them are unaccompanied minors who fled violence in their home country, were taken in by ICE and were in detention, highly traumatized by that. And then after they were released, they're often trafficked into drug selling in exchange for housing and basic survival needs. And just curious what the task force is doing to get at the root of why the Honduran youth have been targeted for this in the first place. And I think that that's a huge part in the process of understanding what is happening. So I just want to bring that up as a key piece about like before moving forward with any recommendation. Has anyone talked to people who've been directly impacted by being forced to sell? So I hope that the task force addresses this.
Great, thank you very much. All right, speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Hi, thanks. My name is Jesse. Hi, I just want to reiterate, what someone else said, which was that, it seems like this is, you guys are kind of in your ivory tower theory crafting about, what's the best thing to happen, in your Sim City down there, in the game that you guys are manipulating. And, there real people on the streets every day that are having to deal with this. And as someone who operates a business in the city, I'm thinking, is it just time to give up and leave the city? And I think you guys have to realize there's like a real market dynamic at play, and San Francisco has made itself into a magnet of drug dealing and street camping and all of this antisocial behavior. It's not just like these people are people that have kind of like lost their way in San Francisco that are San Francisco natives. The policies in San Francisco are attracting people from all over the nation for this lifestyle and for being able to freely do drugs and defecate on the streets and camp on the streets. And at what point do we start considering the people who are actually paying to live there, paying taxes with the expectation of having clean, safe streets? We spend so much money on this issue every year, and it just makes the problem worse. I think it's time to acknowledge that this is actually like a national issue. It's not something that's going to be solved in San Francisco by just trying to tax the San Francisco taxpayer, unlimited amounts of money to pay for the entire nation's drug and mental illness problem that it seems to want to just continue to attract endlessly. There will be no end to the number of people coming for free services, free luxury hotel rooms, free drug binges, and all of the services that are provided by San Francisco to the entire nation's population of drug addicts and mentally ill. So please acknowledge what you guys are doing. There is not, you can't raise the taxes high enough. You'll make the taxes 100%, and there still won't be enough money to do it, and you will have driven out all of the businesses in the city, all of the wealthy people in the city. There'll be no one left. There'll be no tax base left. The streets will be entirely filthy and overrun with campsites and drug dealing, and there will be nowhere for our children to go. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the comment. All right, speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Hi, thank you so much. This is Izzy. I work with Free SF and USF jails, and I represent folks in deportation proceedings. I just want to really, really encourage this task force to, when you're thinking about harms, when you're thinking about solutions, to think about who are the people that are selling drugs, right? And when we're talking about these folks, they're not generic dealers or sellers. These are human beings. And these are human beings who are lacking resources, and folks don't sell in the way that folks are selling in the Tenderloin if they have access to resources. Ms. Striker spoke to the fact that folks deal as a way to access some sort of need. And when we think about the folks who are selling and who are being incarcerated and affected by these policies, Mr. Young used the term illegal immigrant. These folks are unaccompanied minors, as Sarah mentioned. These are folks who don't have access to housing because they don't necessarily have social security numbers. These are youth who have been traumatized, who have been separated from their families, who are here trying to self-support and who are being completely ignored by the city. And so when we're having these conversations, it is so crucial to be thinking and recognizing that those in the city who lack resources, who have the least resources, are the most likely to be put, on street corners like we're seeing, and then incarcerated. And that incarceration has ripple effects, right? Like once someone has criminal charges, they're even less capable of getting legal employment. They're even less capable of getting safe housing. Those harms manifest and become worse and worse. And so as a city, we cannot be coming back to these same solutions of incarceration that we've been talking about for decades. We need to be thinking about resources. We need to be recognizing, you know, what the Tenderloin looks like and how that's different from what Ms. Striker has talked about in terms of college campuses and suburban neighborhoods. The difference, you know, for the most part is poverty and race and mental illness, and that it makes it different. And so when we're having these conversations, we need to be constantly returning to root harms and not just thinking about CVS, but thinking about who are the people who are being put in these positions.
All right, thank you very much for your comment. All right, speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Hi, my name is Cheryl Shanks, and I'm calling from the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And so my concern is trauma that is from the police enforcement on. Most of them are pretty good. They will talk to people, but there's a lot that throw away the drugs and ask people to throw away their drugs, which causes panic. It causes panic, and it causes chaos that leads up to a lot of violence. And so I'm thinking of de-escalation versus law enforcement, and you know, helping the people with resources versus traumatizing them over and over again by trauma that they already have in throwing away the drugs. That I don't see the sense in that at all. So I think at this time the police should really work more on de-escalation versus causing chaos and panic. So I think that would help a lot in this traumatized community until more resources are available.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it. All right. I see that there's nobody else that's signed up for public comment, and we are right at the end of the meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have one more person who's going to be our final speaker here. Let me, all right, speaker, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. This is Sam Dennison. I'm sure you're getting tired of hearing it from me meeting after meeting, so I'll make this a little quick. After our last meeting, I spent a lot of time thinking about what Carl Fabry and Max were talking about. And one of the things that came to me was that I feel like we are looking at a patient who has diabetes and a wound on his foot. And that part of what we're faced with is a false choice between treating the wound or treating the diabetes, using law enforcement or not using law enforcement. And I'd like us to really think about when somebody has both a serious wound, especially if it's moving towards that level of sepsis, that if we don't treat the diabetes will kill the person. And if we don't treat the wound will kill the person. So as we argue about which is worse, we are simply letting both diseases get the best of us. I think rather than having competing ideas of do we use law enforcement or not use law enforcement, or do we use only treatment or no treatment, I think we have to talk about how do these various pieces fit together. And in my mind, the last caller was absolutely correct that there is a larger disease even, and it's based in the experiences of poverty and racism of this community. And it's much harder to put our fingers on, and yet these are the things that I think we will have to deal with in the long run, because the violence that we see isn't only related to is not only related to, sorry, something just went off here. I've got but you know, the disease is complex here that we're facing, and I just want us to keep that in mind, that what's going to kill us and what is killing us in the long run is complicated. And so when I hear people talk about there's a fire that needs to be put out or we need to act urgently, what we are living with is really the consequence of 40 to 60 years of intense trauma that's been played out through drug-related violence, sexually related violence, domestically related violence, and even police-related violence. And all of those levels of violence have left us in a particularly complicated and vulnerable place. So I'm appreciating that last time we had Randy Shaw to speak on one level about really focusing on a certain level of community need, and this week Alyssa Striker. And I'd really like us to continue that process of looking more deeply at how these things fit together rather than how they compete. Thank you.
Well, Sam, thank you so much. And please don't hold back. Oh, we really appreciate you calling in and attending the meetings when you can. So with that, I want to thank all of the community members who listened in and made comments. Once again, although Alyssa's not on, I really appreciate the time that she spent preparing for the meeting and answering our questions. And once again, Task Force, I want to thank you for all the work that you've been putting in, not only at these meetings, but also at the work groups. And as you can probably tell by the tone of the conversation we had tonight, we've got a lot more work to do. And I think the work in these various work groups is going to pick up. But this is what we all signed up for. And as I said, Rand and Lisk are here to provide any type of support you need, collecting data, getting evidence on, and figuring out whether or not there's evidence on different interventions you want to consider. So please do consider us a resource. And, you can reach out to me by email or Sarah anytime, and we're going to do our best to get back to you as quickly as possible. So with that, we'll be in touch, but our next full task force meeting will be Tuesday, December 1st at 5 p.m. And once again, Sean Phillips will be sending out the invite in a couple of weeks. So with that, enjoy the rest of your evenings, and I'm sure we'll see each other on email soon. So take care.
Fellas.